You think she doesn't notice that your quiet, composed presence passes beneath her radar like an unnoticed shadow. Yet if you pay attention, you'll realize that nothing about the way she observes you is casual or accidental. That every subtle glance, every micro-expression, every pause in her voice betrays a recognition that you command a form of respect most men spend their entire lives chasing and never obtain. And the beauty of it, what makes it invisible to nearly every other man, is that it does not rely on force, on charm, or on any deliberate effort, but on something far more subtle, far more profound and far more powerful: the way you inhabit yourself, the way you hold your own state, the way you move through the world without need, without desperation, without the constant mindless hunger for approval that so often consumes the average man, leaving him frantic, loud, and utterly predictable. You have been conditioned to believe that influence, attention, and respect must be earned through acts, words, or gestures. Yet the truth, as you will begin to see, is the opposite. They are earned not by trying to impress, but by mastering yourself in ways so quiet, so invisible, that those around you, especially her, cannot help but notice, cannot help but be drawn to the order, the steadiness, the measured presence that radiates from a man who refuses to be disturbed by chaos, who refuses to be led by the impulses of others, who stands apart in a world of noise, and who, without even intending to, creates a gravitational pull of recognition and respect that settles around him like a silent halo. Observe her reactions, and you will begin to notice the patterns. She does not always speak of it. She does not always act in ways that overtly reveal the weight of her assessment. Yet every hesitation, every slight adjustment of her posture when you enter a room, every moment she chooses to pause rather than speak, is a signal, a micro-acknowledgement of the authority you project without even knowing it. And the more you watch, the more you will see that what seems effortless, what seems invisible to you, is in reality a subtle orchestration of your own behavior, a dance of perception and presence that she has been measuring and calibrating from the very moment you arrived, and that she responds to, not because she is aware of the rules, but because her mind has evolved to recognize patterns of dominance, control, composure, and self-possession with unerring accuracy. Most men fail to understand this, not because it is complicated, but because they are blind to subtlety, blind to the small, almost imperceptible cues that dictate attraction and respect, blind to the difference between those who perform and those who simply are. They misinterpret energy for value, they misread loudness for authority, and they mistake flattery for connection. Yet you, merely by inhabiting your own state and refusing to react to the chaotic oscillations of those around you, have already demonstrated a form of influence that is far more enduring, far more respected, and far more psychologically resonant than anything they can manufacture with words or gestures. And here lies the paradox. The less you try, the more she notices. The less you push, the more she evaluates. The quieter your presence, the louder the signal of respect she internalizes, a signal that moves beneath her conscious awareness, shaping her perception of you at the deepest, most instinctive levels. It is invisible to the casual observer, unrecognizable to the untrained man, yet undeniable in the way she pauses mid-thought when you speak, in the way her attention subtly tracks your movements, in the way her body, even when she resists admitting it, unconsciously adjusts to the order and composure you project. This is the architecture of respect, the hidden mechanism that separates men who are noticed, admired, and quietly revered from those who are ignored, dismissed, and forgotten. It is not flashy, it is not performative, it is not the product of charm or seduction. It is the outcome of a psychological truth so profound that it has been observed across centuries, codified by philosophers, warriors, and statesmen, yet understood by almost no one. that true influence is born not from the outside, but from the mastery of the self, and that a man who holds his own state, who refuses to be reactive, who navigates chaos with calm, who maintains composure when the world pushes and pulls, triggers something in women that is immediate, instinctive, and irreversible. She respects him, even before she recognizes why, and she often does not tell you, because to articulate it would be to violate the instinctive assessment her mind is constantly performing. And so you watch the average man stumble, flailing for recognition, trying desperately to manufacture respect through noise, while you, by simply being, silently, steadily, inevitably trigger her attention and her subconscious recalibration of your value, a subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that unfolds not in words, but in micro-expressions, in posture, in the way her body and mind respond to the invisible order you have created. And this is where you begin to understand the true depth of the power you wield without realizing it. The power to influence, the power to be respected, the power to command attention simply through your presence, your calm, your self-mastery. And this is a secret almost no man ever grasps, because almost no man ever stops long enough to notice the invisible architecture of human psychology that is silently observing him, even as he believes himself unnoticed. You may not realize it yet, but every subtle decision you make, every nuance in the way you carry yourself, registers in her mind with a precision that seems almost preternatural. Because the female psyche is wired to detect patterns, to measure consistency, to weigh behavioral resonance against unspoken standards that even she cannot fully articulate. And while you think that she is distracted, indifferent, or casual, she is actively compiling a map of your value, tracing every reaction, every calm response, every unshaken posture, and placing invisible markers on the architecture of your presence that ultimately determine not only the respect she holds for you, but the degree of attention, curiosity, and silent admiration she reserves for the rare few who inhabit the world with composure and mastery rather than clamor and instability. Consider for a moment how easily chaos unsettles the average man. A sudden shift in her mood, a delayed reply, a subtle challenge, and most men crumble, respond too quickly, or overcompensate in ways that scream need, desperation, and lack of self-possession. And yet, when you encounter these same situations, you do not flinch, you do not chase, you do not expend energy trying to control her perception, because you understand, whether consciously or instinctively, that the architecture of respect is built not by reaction, but by measured response, by calm, by maintaining a state unshaken by the noise that consumes others. And it is precisely this differential that sets you apart, that triggers an unconscious recalibration in her mind, and that cements in ways she cannot articulate that you are a man of weight, of authority, of presence, and of value. Her mind evolved to evaluate, to filter, to project and re-evaluate these patterns in ways that are often imperceptible to the conscious eye. The slight elongation of your pause before answering, the subtle alignment of your posture when she speaks, the absence of tension in your voice, the lack of neediness in your gaze. All of which, taken together, compose a silent language she reads fluently, a language whose vocabulary consists of emotional steadiness, behavioral consistency, and the invisible authority that emanates from mastery over oneself, rather than the chaotic display of effort that consumes nearly every other man in her vicinity. And this is why she respects you, not for what you do, but for who you are beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the desperate gestures that fill the lives of those around you. You may also notice, if you pay careful attention, that she tests in ways so subtle you might miss them entirely unless you are attuned to the cadence of her mind. A slight hesitation, a challenging remark, a gaze that lingers longer than expected, And each of these tests, rather than being obstacles, are in fact opportunities, micro measures of your self-possession. And every time you respond with composure, every time you maintain emotional equilibrium, every time you withhold the impulse to chase, to correct, to prove, you reinforce a neurological reward cycle in her mind, creating subconscious loops of recognition and recalibration that signal to her, at levels below conscious thought, that you are a man of value, that you deserve attention, that you warrant respect, and that the influence you wield is not something she must grant, but something she instinctively acknowledges. This is where the most potent psychological leverage exists, in the gap between her perception and her articulation, in the space where instinct meets evaluation, where curiosity meets silent acknowledgement. And in this space, every subtle cue you emit, every controlled expression, every deliberate silence, creates a gravitational pull of respect and recognition that no amount of charm, no amount of effort, no amount of performance can replicate, because what she responds to is authentic composure, unshakable presence, and the invisible architecture of a man who commands himself before attempting to command the world around him. And here lies the deep truth that separates you from the majority of men who will never comprehend it. While they flail, chase, and overcompensate, while they expend themselves in futile attempts to create influence, you exist in a different realm, one governed not by noise, but by order, not by reaction, but by principle. And as she observes you, consciously or unconsciously, she begins to internalize the signals you project, the patterns you maintain, the calm certainty that emanates from a man whose center is unshakable. And she cannot help but respect you, because respect is the inevitable consequence of mastery that others cannot feign. This is the hidden mechanism of attraction and influence. It is not effortful, not performative, not overt, but subtle, invisible, and unrelenting. It unfolds not through what you say, but through the behavioral patterns you maintain, through the energy you radiate, through the state you embody. And it works continuously, quietly, invisibly, until the moment she recognizes it fully, often only after the fact, and even then, she may never articulate it, because it is instinct, it is perception, it is the recognition of a man whose self-mastery commands respect without demand, and whose presence silently, irresistibly, triggers the alignment of her attention, curiosity, and admiration in ways no man trying to perform or impress could ever hope to replicate. It is here, in the quiet calibration between her mind and your presence, that the vast majority of men fail to see, fail to understand, and fail to embody what you are beginning to grasp, that respect, influence, and attraction are not granted by words, gestures, or charm, but by the consistent, invisible, psychological architecture of composure, self-possession, and controlled presence that only a few men ever achieve. And it is this invisible mastery, this unrecognized authority, that positions you far above the noise, far beyond the effortful gestures of others, and firmly within a sphere of influence that is as undeniable as it is unseen. And it is precisely here, in this domain of subtle yet unyielding psychological power, that you begin to understand why, without trying, without knowing, without even realizing the mechanisms at play, you trigger her respect, command her attention, and occupy a space that most men will never reach. There comes a point where she stops trying to define you. She no longer knows whether to fear you, admire you, or submit to the gravity of what you've become. Because the truth is, the more you stop chasing her perception, the more she chases her own clarity about you. You exist in her mind like a shadow of unfinished business, calm, collected, but never conquered. And that ambiguity, that mystery she cannot resolve, is the birthplace of her deepest respect. She begins to sense something sacred in your restraint. While others perform, you remain. While others explain, you observe. You move through the world as if you already know the answer, and that unnerves her. Because women are drawn to certainty, but they are enchanted by silence, the kind that hides a man's self-control, his pain, his discipline, his quiet hunger. You don't announce who you are, you simply are. And that's the paradox that breaks her equilibrium. She can no longer control what she can no longer predict. There's an old truth whispered through centuries of male initiation, that the strongest man is not the one who conquers others, but the one who doesn't need to prove he can. This is what separates you from the rest. You've reached a level of masculine gravity that bends the emotional space around you. You draw her respect, not by demand, but by demonstration. By existing in quiet alignment with your purpose, you remind her of something primal, that strength without arrogance is divine, and composure under temptation is the ultimate form of power. In her mind, you become a test, not of her affection, but of her own feminine depth. She wonders why she values your opinion more than others, why your silence cuts deeper than another man's confession, why your withdrawal feels heavier than another's presence. And though she'll never admit it, part of her wants to rise to meet your standard, to be seen by the man who doesn't need to look. You've entered the realm where presence becomes persuasion. Every action, every pause, every subtle change in your tone carries weight. Because you are not reacting to her world, she's reacting to yours. The polarity shifts. Her emotional compass starts to align with your stability. She measures her words through the lens of how you might perceive them. She starts correcting her own behavior without you saying a thing. That is the silent authority of a man who unknowingly triggers respect. But here lies the irony. The moment you seek to hold that power consciously, it dissolves. Respect cannot be forced. It can only be evoked. It is born in the spaces where your discipline meets her curiosity, where your indifference meets her longing, where your composure exposes her chaos. You are not manipulating her. You are mirroring her subconscious need for order, and that mirror compels her to evolve. She begins to see you as something beyond attraction. You become a principle, a reminder that masculinity, when rooted in inner control, commands not through fear, but through reverence. Your steadiness exposes every impulsive man who once held her attention. And in that comparison, she redefines value itself. Because deep down, every woman craves the man who cannot be seduced by the surface of things. The one whose emotions are not commodities, whose attention is not for sale, whose respect must be earned. When you embody that, you transcend the need to be chosen. And paradoxically, that's when you are. You don't need to chase her validation. She's already chasing your equilibrium. You don't need to convince her of your worth. She's already re-evaluating her own. You've shown her through the quiet language of masculine restraint that power isn't about domination, it's about sovereignty. It's about ruling yourself so completely that no external storm can unseat your calm. And as she watches you move through life, deliberate, unbothered, certain, something awakens in her. Not infatuation, not fantasy, but reverence. The same reverence a soul feels for something unshakable. You've unknowingly reminded her that respect, once triggered, is not given out of fear, but out of recognition. Recognition of a man who has mastered the one domain she cannot touch, his inner world.